Inspector Silas Crow's flashlight beam cut through the November rain like a scalpel, finding Naira Vale pressed against the stone foundation of Blackwater Span, 24 years old, but carrying 40 years of exhaustion in her hollow cheeks. 95 pounds soaking wet, and she was always soaking wet. Her dark hair hung in tangles around eyes that had learned not to hope for anything, and her hands bore the permanent tremor of someone who hadn't eaten anything but gas station leftovers in 3 days. "You're still breathing my air, rat." Crow's voice dripped contempt as he kicked through her cardboard shelter, scattering the threadbare blanket she'd found behind the laundromat into the mud. "Still squatting under my bridge. That's trespassing. That's loitering. That's you being a problem I'm tired of solving nicely." Naira struggled to stand, her lungs rattling with every breath, the chronic illness she couldn't afford to treat burning through her chest like slow fire. "I'm leaving," she whispered. "I'm already gone." "Not fast enough." Crow crushed the plastic bottle she used to collect rainwater under his heel, then ground it into pieces. "You know what the city does with trash? They incinerate it." What Crow didn't know, what he couldn't see through the sheets of rain hammering the bridge above, was that in exactly 36 seconds, a black luxury sedan with tinted windows and diplomatic plates would lose control on the slick highway overhead. The driver, a pale man in formal attire with silver hair and a circlet that caught moonlight like frozen starfire, would be Lord Selim Draven, the 200-year-old vampire king whose existence was forbidden from being touched by mortal hands. And the broken homeless woman Crow was currently degrading would make a choice that would violate the oldest blood law in the immortal realm. Because ancient magic says a human cannot claim the life of a crowned vampire without consequence. But Naira Vale had stopped believing she had anything left to lose. Welcome back to our story, family. Before we dive into today's incredible tale, I need you to do something for me. If you're someone who believes that even the most broken people can become someone's miracle, hit that subscribe button right now. This is the story of Naira Vale, a homeless girl who saved a 200-year-old vampire king from drowning, and in doing so, shattered every law in the immortal realm. This story has rescue, romance, political intrigue, and a bond that will change 2 worlds forever. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because I want to know which corner of the world is about to experience this journey with me. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because what happens in the final chapter will leave you breathless. Now, let's begin where survival meets destiny, beneath a bridge where the forgotten become legendary. Crow spat into the puddle at Naira's feet and turned away, his flashlight beam slashing once more through the darkness before disappearing up the stairs. His patrol car engine roared to life. Red taillights bled into the rain. Then everything fell silent. Naira stood there shaking, not from cold alone, though the November storm had soaked through every layer she owned, but from the familiar numbness of being treated like something less than human. Rain ran down her face in rivulets, washing away nothing. She dropped to her knees in the mud, her numb fingers searching blindly for what could be salvaged. The second jacket she'd been saving, ruined, ground into a puddle by Crow's boots. The small cache of coins she'd collected panhandling outside the grocery store, scattered, half of them already washed into the drainage grate. The photograph of her mother, she kept wrapped in plastic, mercifully still dry, still there. She pulled it close, her hands trembling. Her mother's face stared back at her through the years, forever young, forever smiling. "You're stronger than you think," her mother used to say. But her mother had been wrong. Naira wasn't strong. She was just stubborn enough to keep breathing when everything else screamed at her to stop. She was about to stand when the sound tore through the night. Not thunder. Not rain. The scream of tires losing their grip on wet asphalt. Sharp, desperate, the sound of physics failing and fate taking over. Then metal shrieked against metal. The guardrail above shattered with a crack like a gunshot echoing through the storm. Naira looked up just as the black sedan ripped through the barrier as if it were paper. For one impossible moment, the car hung suspended in the air. She saw everything. The sleek luxury body of the vehicle tilting forward. Rain exploding around it like shattered diamonds. The way it slowly rotated as gravity remembered its pull. Then it plunged. The sedan struck the river nose first with a sound like the world splitting open. Water erupted 15 feet into the air, a geyser of black liquid and white foam. Waves crashed toward the bank where Naira knelt, soaking her all over again. She watched the car sink. The front was already swallowed by the hungry black water. Only the rear remained visible, like the hand of a drowning man reaching up in one final desperate plea. Through the back window, she could see him, a figure with pale skin and silver hair slumped against the deployed airbag, motionless. Above on the highway, there were horns, screams, someone shouting about calling 911. But down here, beneath Blackwater Span, there was only Naira, and the sinking car, and the man inside who had maybe 60 seconds left before the river claimed him forever. Her mind screamed at her to run. Who was she to save anyone? She couldn't even save herself. She was nothing. Trash. Crow was right. She was already gone, already invisible, already dead in every way that mattered. But her legs didn't listen. They carried her toward the river's edge, one step at a time, as if something else were moving her, something deeper than thought, older than fear. Naira stripped off her outer jacket and let it fall into the mud. Then the inner one. Then her torn sneakers. She stood there in only a threadbare shirt and jeans, shivering in the freezing rain, staring at the black water that waited like an open mouth. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know if he was good or evil, if he deserved mercy or judgment. She only knew that someone was dying, and she was the only one who could do something about it. When was the last time she had mattered? When was the last time her existence had meant anything at all? Maybe tonight. Or maybe tonight she would die with a stranger beneath the freezing river. Either way, at least she wouldn't die as someone who did nothing. Naira drew a deep breath, her diseased lungs burning, whistling in protest, and threw herself into the water. The cold hit her like the fist of death itself. 38 degrees. That was the temperature of the river in November. Cold enough to stop the heart in minutes. Cold enough to steal every thought from the mind and replace it with animal panic. The thermal shock blasted through Naira's body. Her lungs locked. Her muscles seized. For 3 horrifying seconds, she forgot how to swim. She sank into darkness, water flooding her nose and mouth, and she thought, this is it. This is how I die. Then something deeper than fear kicked in, the survival instinct she thought she'd lost years ago, buried under hunger and cold and Crow's endless cruelty. Her arms began to move. Her legs began to kick. And she remembered distant summers when her mother was still alive, when they'd go to the public pool and her mother would hold her in the shallow end. You're a fighter, her mother had said, even when you don't feel like one. Naira kicked hard, her body cutting through the black water toward the sinking sedan. Every stroke was a battle. The current pulled at her like hands trying to drag her downstream, trying to make her just another piece of debris the river carried away. But she was not debris. Not tonight. 10 meters. 5 meters. The luxury car loomed before her like a dark monster being swallowed by the deep. The front was already completely submerged, water pouring in through every crack and seam, dragging it down second by second. Naira dove, her hands groping along the cold metal body until they found the driver's side window. Through the glass, she saw him clearly for the first time. The most beautiful man she had ever seen. Pale skin like marble. Silver hair that floated in the water like spilled mercury. Sharp, aristocratic features that looked carved rather than born. And resting against his forehead, even through blood and water, was a thin circlet of dark metal set with stones that gleamed with their own cold light. His eyes were closed. His body was motionless. He might already be dead. Naira had no time to check. She grabbed the door handle and pulled.
Locked.
Of course it was locked. The crash had triggered every security system in the vehicle, turning the luxury sedan into a sealed coffin. Naira's lungs began screaming for air. She had 30 seconds, maybe less, before she would have to surface or drown alongside him. Her eyes darted desperately through the murky water, and she saw it, a chunk of broken concrete from the bridge foundation, half buried in the silt on the riverbed. Naira grabbed it. The stone was heavy, impossibly heavy, like trying to lift the weight of her entire wasted life. Her fingers clawed into rough concrete. Her nails broke. Skin tore. Blood bloomed in the water around her hands. She didn't care. She lifted the concrete block, her entire body shaking with effort, and slammed it against the window. The first blow did nothing. The second made spiderweb cracks spread across the glass. The third, with every last shred of strength in her exhausted, starving, dying body, shattered the window into 1,000 pieces. What happened next would be told in vampire courts for centuries. How a mortal girl, broken and discarded, reached through shattered glass with bleeding hands. How she grabbed hold of an immortal king and refused to let the river take him. How she violated a law older than nations and bound herself to a crown she didn't even know existed. But that night, beneath Blackwater Span, Naira Vale knew none of this. She only knew she had to pull him free, and that 36 seconds had become an eternity measured in heartbeats and desperation. Glass bit into Naira's palms as she reached through the shattered window, each shard opening new wounds that bled dark ribbons into the black water. She couldn't feel the pain. Not yet. The cold had numbed everything except the brutal certainty that she was running out of time. The man was enormous. Not just tall, but built with the kind of presence that took up space even unconscious. His shoulders barely fit through the window frame. His head lolled forward against the deflating airbag, silver hair drifting like silk in the water that now filled the car's interior past his chest. Naira grabbed his arm, cold as marble, impossibly solid, and pulled. Nothing. He didn't move. The seatbelt held him locked in place, and Naira's fingers were already going numb, her muscles screaming, her lungs beginning to convulse with the desperate need for air she didn't have. Let go, her body screamed. Surface.
Breathe. Live.
But if she surfaced now, he would die. Naira felt along his chest with shaking hands until she found the seatbelt buckle. She pressed it once.
Twice.
Her vision was starting to tunnel, darkness creeping in at the edges. On the third try, something clicked. The belt released. The man's body immediately slumped forward, dead weight pulling him toward the submerged dashboard. Naira caught him, wrapped her arms around his torso from behind, and pulled. It was like trying to move a statue. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds of pure muscle and bone. The window frame caught his shoulders. Water resistance fought every inch she gained. The current that had tried to sweep her away now seemed determined to pin them both inside this sinking tomb. Naira's lungs were on fire. Black spots danced across her vision. Her body was shutting down, cell by cell, second by second. She pulled harder. Something gave. His shoulders cleared the window frame. Naira kicked backward, her legs pumping weakly, her arms locked around his chest in a death grip that was as much about her own survival as his. If she let go now, she wouldn't have the strength to grab him again. They rose through the water together, inches at a time, slower than drowning, faster than death. That's when she felt it. A heat that shouldn't exist in this frozen river. A pulse of something that moved through the water like electricity through wire, originating from the man's body and spreading outward in ripples Naira could feel but not see. It touched her skin, her arms wrapped around him, her chest pressed against his back, and for one impossible moment, the cold didn't matter. The magic, if that's what it was, felt wrong. Ancient. Hungry. Like touching a live wire buried in the earth for centuries, finally exposed to air. It passed through her, leaving a burn that had nothing to do with temperature, and then it was gone. Naira didn't have time to understand it. Her head broke the surface, and she gasped, dragging in air that hurt worse than drowning. Rain hammered her face. The storm screamed. The current tried to rip the man from her arms. She kicked toward the bank, using the last shreds of strength her body hadn't already spent. The mud of the riverbank appeared through the rain, 5 feet away, then 3, then close enough to touch. Naira got her feet under her in the shallows and heaved, pulling the man's torso onto the muddy bank. His legs were still in the water. She was still in the water. Everything was gray and black, and she couldn't tell if she was standing or falling. She grabbed his arms and pulled. Inch by inch, she dragged him fully onto the bank. His body left a trail through the mud. Naira collapsed beside him, her chest heaving, coughing up river water that tasted like rust and decay. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She could only lie there in the rain, shaking violently, while her body tried to remember how to be alive. Sirens. Distant but growing closer. Red and blue lights beginning to strobe through the rain from the highway above. Naira forced herself onto her hands and knees. Blood from her shredded palms mixed with mud and rainwater. She looked at the man beside her. His face was turned toward the sky, eyes closed, lips slightly parted. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, but the rain was already washing it away, leaving his skin pale as death, smooth as stone. The circlet, she could see it clearly now, was made of black metal twisted into thorns, set with stones that gleamed like trapped stars even in darkness. He looked like something out of a myth, like royalty from a world that shouldn't exist. His chest rose.
Fell.
Rose again. He was breathing. Naira had saved him. The sirens grew louder. Voices echoed from above. Flashlight beams began sweeping the riverbank, searching. Every instinct Naira had learned in 3 years of survival screamed the same thing. Run. Disappear. Being seen means being hurt. She staggered to her feet, every muscle protesting, and stumbled back toward the shadows beneath Blackwater Span. Her wet clothes clung to her like a second skin. Her hands left bloody prints on the stone support as she pulled herself into the darkness. Behind her, the man, the stranger, the drowning victim, the one with the crown, lay motionless on the riverbank as rain continued to wash blood from his face. Naira pressed herself against the cold stone and watched as the first responders descended the embankment, their flashlights finding him immediately. Watched as they surrounded him, checked his pulse, called for more help. Watched as one of them, a paramedic with graying hair, went very still and said something quietly into his radio that made the others step back. Naira didn't know what that meant. She didn't know who he was or why saving him had felt like breaking something fundamental in the universe itself. She only knew that in exactly 3 minutes, she would vanish into the storm, and Lord Selim Draven would wake to a debt that would remake both their worlds. Selim Draven woke to the smell of blood and old stone. Not his blood, though he tasted copper on his tongue and felt the ghost of river water in his lungs. The blood belonged to someone else. Someone whose scent clung to his clothes like a brand, sharp and mortal and wrong in ways that made his entire body recoil. He opened his eyes. Vaulted ceilings arched above him, carved from black marble veined with silver. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames casting shadows that moved like living things. He lay on a stone altar in the center of the grand sanctuary, the hidden heart of his court, a place built before the city above had a name. And surrounding him were faces he had known for decades. Centuries. Faces that should never look afraid. My lord. The voice belonged to Marcellus, his first blade, a vampire who had survived wars that rewrote continents. His dark eyes were steady, but his hands gripped the hilt of his sword with white-knuckled tension. You're awake. Selim sat up slowly. His body moved without pain, without weakness, as it always had. 200 years of immortality had made him nearly indestructible. Nearly.
The river, he said.
His voice came out rough and used. The car went into the river. Yes. This voice belonged to Alara, his keeper of laws, ancient even by vampire standards, her silver-white hair bound in intricate braids, her face carved from time itself. She stepped forward, her crimson robes whispering against stone. You were pulled from the water. Your driver, Vincent, did not survive the impact.
Selim processed this.
Vincent had served him for 30 years. A good man. Loyal. Gone now because Selim had insisted on driving through a storm to reach a political negotiation that suddenly seemed meaningless. Who found me?
Selim asked.
The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with unspoken dread. A human, Alara said finally. A mortal woman. She dove into the river and pulled you out before authorities arrived. Selim went very still. That's impossible, he said quietly. We have surveillance footage from the highway cameras. Marcellus moved to a side table where a tablet glowed softly. He turned it toward Selim. We've already had it scrubbed from city records, but we retrieved a copy first. The video played in silence. Grainy, rain distorted, but unmistakable. A small figure standing on the riverbank, stripping off layers. The moment of hesitation before the dive. The endless seconds underwater. Then, impossibly, dragging a body twice her size onto the mud. The camera angle caught her face for only a moment before she vanished into the shadows.
Young.
Dark-haired. Hollow-cheeked. Humans. Mortal. She saved your life, Alara said. Her voice carried no inflection, but her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them before her. A human claimed the existence of a crowned immortal. The blood-bound covenant has been violated. Selim felt it then. A burn that started in his chest and spread outward like fire through ice, hot and cold simultaneously, painful in a way nothing had hurt in 2 centuries. It wrapped around his ribs, coiled through his veins, and settled somewhere behind his sternum like a hook embedded in bone. The bond. He gasped despite himself, gripping the edge of the altar. The sensation was intimate, invasive, wrong. Like having someone else's heartbeat suddenly synchronized with his own, their breath tethered to his lungs, their existence knotted irrevocably into his. He could feel her.
Faint. Distant. But there. Cold.
Exhausted. Afraid. Still alive. My lord. Marcellus took a step forward. Selim held up one hand, forcing control back into his body. The bond settled into a dull ache, persistent and undeniable. I feel it, he said.
The debt.
The girl must be found. This came from Lord Darius, who stepped from the shadows at the back of the sanctuary. He was old blood, one of the original families, his power absolute, his politics ruthless. And she must be executed before word spreads beyond this court. Agreed. Lady Seraphine emerged from the opposite side, her beauty sharp as broken glass, her ambition sharper still. The law is clear. No human may save a crowned immortal. The penalty is death for both parties involved. Both parties. Marcellus's hand moved to his sword. You would execute our king for being saved? I would preserve the realm from chaos, Seraphine said coldly. If the human lives, the bond lives. If the bond lives, every vampire court from here to the old continent will see our king as compromised, weakened, human-touched. She speaks the truth, Darius added. Already whispers have begun. Some say this is the prophecy, the mortal hand that breaks the crown. Prophecy is superstition. Alara's voice cut through the rising tension. But blood law is not. The covenant states clearly, the saved and the savior are bound until death claims one or both. This bond cannot be severed by decree or desire. Selim listened to them argue, feeling the hook behind his sternum pull tighter with each word. The girl, whoever she was, had no idea what she'd done. She'd saved a stranger from drowning and unknowingly chained herself to laws older than nations. Enough. His voice was quiet, but it silenced the room instantly. Selim stood, his body moving with the deadly grace of a predator, and faced his court. The girl will be found, but she will not be harmed. My lord, Darius began. I have spoken. Selim's eyes swept across each of them, 2 centuries of absolute authority compressed into that single gaze. No one touches her. No one speaks of this beyond these walls. Marcellus, assemble your best trackers. Find her quietly. Bring me information, not a body. And when will we find her? Marcellus asked carefully. Then I will decide what honor demands. Selim turned away from them, dismissing them without words. He heard them leave, Darius and Seraphine with barely concealed fury, Alara with troubled silence, Marcellus with soldier's efficiency. When the sanctuary was empty, Selim walked to where rainwater had pooled on the marble floor, tracked in by his quartz boots. He stared at it, seeing fragments of the river, feeling the echo of freezing water in lungs that no longer needed air. A human girl had dove into that water, had shredded her hands on broken glass, had dragged him to shore with strength she shouldn't possess, had violated every law his realm was built upon, and probably had no idea. The bond pulled tight, a compass pointing toward her through the dark. Selim didn't know if what he felt was gratitude or rage. He only knew that finding her was no longer optional. The debt had been made, and blood law demanded it be paid. Naira made it back to Blackwater Span just before dawn. Her hands had stopped bleeding, but the cuts were deep, filled with river silt and bacteria that would guarantee infection without treatment she couldn't afford. Her lungs rattled with every breath. Worse than before, the cold water having accelerated whatever disease had been slowly killing her for months. She crawled into the dry corner beneath the bridge, where she kept her things and wrapped herself in the only blanket Crow hadn't destroyed. Her body shook so violently her teeth clattered. Fever was already building behind her eyes, turning her vision hazy at the edges. The man from the river, the one with silver hair and a crown of thorns, was alive. She'd seen the paramedics revive him, seen him breathe. That should have meant something. But as dawn broke cold and gray over the city, Naira realized the truth. Saving him had changed nothing. She was still here, still invisible, still dying by degrees beneath a bridge no one cared about. At least, she thought bitterly, she'd die knowing she wasn't completely useless. 40 blocks north, Inspector Silas Crow sat in his office reviewing footage he wasn't supposed to have. The highway department had scrubbed the crash video from official records within 2 hours, unusual, but not unprecedented for accidents involving high-profile victims. What was unprecedented was how thoroughly it had been erased. No backups. No redundancies. Just gone, as if it never existed. But Crow had learned long ago that nothing truly disappeared if you knew where to look. He'd retrieved the footage from a traffic camera positioned on the opposite side of the bridge, one that officially wasn't working that night. He watched the video for the 5th time. The car is going over. The small figure diving in. The impossible rescue. He zoomed in on the figure's face during the single frame where the angle was right. Son of a bitch, Crow whispered. The rat. The homeless trash he'd been harassing beneath Blackwater Span Naira Vale. He leaned back in his chair, mind racing. The car had diplomatic plates he'd checked. The passenger list was classified above his clearance level, and the sanitization job on the footage screamed money, power, and connections that made city officials move like puppets on strings. Someone very important had nearly died in that river, and Naira, worthless, invisible Naira, had saved them. Crow smiled slowly. He'd spent 3 years tormenting her because it was easy, because she was nothing, because hurting powerless people was a hobby that cost him nothing. But now she might be worth something after all. He picked up his phone and made a call to a contact who dealt in information the city pretended didn't exist. "I need to know who was in the vehicle from the Blackwater crash," he said. "And I need to know what they're willing to pay to find the person who saved them." Beneath Blackwater's span, Naira woke to the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the first time. Living on the streets taught you to sense predators, human ones at least. But this felt different. The weight of unseen eyes had followed her for 2 days now, a presence that made her skin crawl even when she couldn't identify the source. She told herself it was paranoia, fever, exhaustion. But when she went to the gas station 3 blocks away to refill her water bottle, she saw him. A man in dark clothing standing across the street, perfectly still in a way humans never were. His eyes tracked her through the window, and when she met his gaze, something in his expression made her blood run cold. Not hunger, not lust. Something older and infinitely more dangerous. Naira left through the back exit, heart hammering, and ran. She felt him following, silent, patient, never quite close enough to catch, but never far enough to lose. She ducked through alleys, climbed a fence despite her screaming lungs, and finally lost him in the maze of abandoned warehouses near the industrial district. She pressed herself against cold brick, gasping, vision swimming. When had being invisible stopped protecting her? When had she become visible to the wrong people? The answer came to her with horrible clarity. The river. The rescue. The man with the crown. Saving him had made her seen. And being seen, she was learning, was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. In his office, Crow ended his 5th call and stared at the photograph of Naira Vale on his screen, a driver's license photo from 6 years ago, before homelessness had carved her face into something haunted. His contact had been very clear. Powerful people were looking for the girl from the river. People who didn't operate through official channels. People who made problems disappear. Crow could sell her location for a price that would set him up for life. Or he could keep her alive and see what she was really worth. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out his service weapon, checking the magazine methodically. "Useful alive," he murmured to the empty room. "At least for now." "Hold on, before we continue, let me ask you something. Are you feeling the tension building? Because we're only getting started." Selim has just discovered that a human girl saved his life, breaking blood laws that have stood for centuries.
His court wants her dead.
But here's what you need to understand. Naira has no idea what's coming for her. If you're hooked on this story and want to see what happens when a vampire king goes hunting for the girl who violated every law to save him, smash that like button right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that will grip your soul just like this one. Drop a Team Naira or Team Selim in the comments. I want to know whose side you're on. Because in the next chapter, Naira's world is about to get even more dangerous. Crow is closing in. Vampire scouts are tracking her. And she has no idea that saving a stranger has made her the most wanted person in 2 realms. Let's continue. They came for Naira on the 4th night. Not the silent watchers who'd been tracking her. These were human. 3 of them, hired muscle, with Crow's money backing their confidence. They cornered her in the alley behind the convenience store, blocking both exits with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this before. "Inspector wants a word," the oldest one said, cracking his knuckles. "You can walk, or we can carry you. Your choice." Naira's fever-bright eyes darted between them, calculating odds she already knew. 3 against 1. She could barely stand. Her lungs were failing. She had nothing. She ran anyway, straight at the smallest man, ducking under his grab, her malnourished frame slipping through the gap like smoke. She made it 5 steps before hands caught her jacket and slammed her against a brick wall hard enough to steal what little breath she had. "Bad choice," the man growled. Then the rain stopped. Not everywhere. Naira could still hear it hammering the street beyond the alley. But here, in this narrow space between buildings, the rain simply stopped, as if an invisible hand had reached down and held it suspended in midair. The three men froze. "Let her go." The voice came from the alley's entrance, soft as falling snow and infinitely more cold. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, pale, dressed in black that made the darkness seem bright by comparison. Silver hair caught the dim streetlight. Naira's heart stopped. It was him, the man from the river, the one with the crown. "Walk away," the large man said, trying to sound threatening and failing. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything concerning her concerns me now." Selim moved forward with the liquid grace of something that had never been human. "I won't ask again." The man holding Naira tightened his grip. "There's three of us, and one of—" He didn't finish the sentence. Selim was suddenly there, impossibly fast, inhumanly silent, his hand wrapped around the man's wrist. Naira heard bones creak. The man released her with a strangled cry and stumbled backward. "Leave," Selim said, "while you can still walk." They ran. Silence fell over the alley like a curtain. The rain resumed its natural rhythm. Selim stood perfectly still, watching Naira with eyes that reflected light like a cat's, silver blue and ancient and absolutely inhuman. Naira's back pressed against the brick wall. "You." "Yes." "You've been following me." Her voice shook from fever or fear or both. "You and the others. The ones who don't move right." "My people have been watching you," Selim confirmed, "ensuring your safety." "Why?" The word came out sharp, defensive. "I don't know you. I don't owe you anything." Something flickered across his perfect features, surprise, perhaps, or pain. "You saved my life. You dove into freezing water and pulled me from a sinking car when any rational person would have let me drown." He took a step closer, and Naira noticed he cast no shadow. "Whether you know it or not, that action created a debt between us. A bond. I don't want your debt." Naira tried to stand straighter despite her shaking legs. "I saved you because you were dying. That's it. I don't need payment or protection or whatever this is." "It's not about what you need." Selim's voice softened, became almost gentle. "The bond exists regardless of what either of us wants. I can feel you, Naira Vale. Your pain, your fever, your fear. It burns through me like fire through ice." Naira flinched hearing her name in his mouth. "How do you know who you are?" He tilted his head slightly. "I've spent 4 days searching for you, learning everything about the woman who did the impossible." He paused, studying her with unnerving intensity. "What I don't understand is why. Why would someone with nothing risk everything for a stranger?" "Because someone was dying," Naira said simply. "What was I supposed to do? Walk away?" "Yes," Selim said. "Most people would have." "Then most people are cowards." The bond flared between them. Naira felt at this time a sudden heat in her chest that had nothing to do with fever. She gasped, pressing a hand over her heart. Across from her, Selim's expression tightened with matching pain. "What was that?" Naira whispered. "The debt recognizes itself." Selim's jaw clenched. "It will only grow stronger until it's resolved. Please, let me help you."
Shelter.
Medicine. Safety. "I don't kneel to anyone," Naira said quietly. "I'm not asking you to kneel." Something that might have been respect crossed his face. "I'm asking you to survive long enough for me to repay what I owe." Naira studied him, this impossible man who stopped rain and moved like shadows and spoke of debts that burned. Her body was failing. Crow wouldn't stop. The watchers would return. "One night," she said finally. "Then I leave." "One night," Selim agreed. He extended his hand. After a long moment, Naira took it. The bond sang between them, recognizing the bargain made. The sanctuary was nothing like Naira expected. She'd imagined a mansion, perhaps. Gothic architecture, velvet curtains, the Hollywood version of vampire wealth. Instead, Selim brought her to a place that existed between, a penthouse that shouldn't fit in the building that contained it, with rooms that were too large and hallways that turned at impossible angles. "The fever root will help your lungs," Alara said, pressing a cup of steaming liquid into Naira's bandaged hands. The ancient vampire woman studied her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "Drink all of it." Naira obeyed, too exhausted to argue. The tea tasted like smoke and spring water and something indefinably other. Within minutes, the rattling in her chest began to ease. "What are you?" Naira asked quietly. "That," Alara said, "is a question with a very long answer." Over the next 3 days, Naira learned fragments. Those vampires were real. That they'd existed for millennia in the spaces between human awareness. That blood laws governed them with absolute authority. That Selim had ruled the Eastern Realm for 2 centuries with power that made other immortals kneel. And that saving him had broken something fundamental. The bond shouldn't exist, Marcellus explained one evening, standing guard outside her room with the patient resignation of a soldier on unwanted duty. "Humans and crowned immortals are kept separate for a reason. You're an anomaly. Is that why they want me dead?" Naira asked. Marcellus's silence was answer enough. She saw it in the way certain court members looked at her. Darius with cold calculation, Seraphine with barely concealed contempt. They moved through the sanctuary like predators circling wounded prey, waiting for permission to strike. Only Selim's presence kept them at bay. He was complicated, terrifying and gentle in turns. He never touched her without permission, never entered her room uninvited, but she felt him through the bond, a constant pressure at the edge of her awareness, watching, waiting. On the 4th night, Naira woke to voices outside her door. Growing stronger every day, she remains alive. Darius's voice, low and urgent. "The bond is compromising him, making him weak. Then we remove the compromise." Seraphine's tone was matter-of-fact, discussing murder like meal planning. One human girl against the stability of the realm. The mathematics are simple. He'll never allow it. He won't have to know until it's done. An accident. A relapse of her illness. These things happen. Naira's blood turned to ice. She was out of bed before conscious thought, grabbing the few belongings she'd acquired, clean clothes, medicine, a coat that actually fit, and moving toward the window. 4 stories up, but there was a fire escape. She'd survived worse. The door opened before she reached the window. Selim stood in the doorway, still as death, his silver eyes taking in the packed bag, the open window, the fear written across her face. "You heard them," he said. "Not a question. I won't be killed because of someone else's politics." Naira's hand trembled on the window latch. "I won't. Neither will I allow it." Selim stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "But running won't save you. They'll hunt you regardless." "So, what do I do?" The question came out raw, exhausted. "Stay here and wait to die? Trust you when your own people want me erased?" "Yes," Selim said simply. Then, quieter, "I know trust is a luxury you've never been able to afford, but I'm asking for it anyway." "Why?" Naira demanded. "Why does this matter so much to you? The debt?
The bond?
I'm nobody." "You dove into a frozen river to save a stranger," Selim interrupted, his composure finally cracking. "You shredded your hands on broken glass. You dragged someone twice your weight to shore with lungs that were already failing. You did the impossible because it was right, not because you'd be rewarded." He took a step closer, and Naira saw something she hadn't expected in his ancient eyes.
Fear.
"You terrify me, Naira Vale," he admitted. "Not because you're powerful, you're not, but because you make me remember what it means to choose mercy over law. And I haven't felt that in 200 years. Naira stared at him. "Your court will never accept me. Then my court will learn to adapt." Selim's voice hardened into the tone of absolute authority that had held a realm together for centuries. Tomorrow, I have a formal session. I will invoke protection that supersedes their objections. And if they refuse, then they choose between me and their prejudice. His eyes met hers.
One night, you said.
But I'm asking for more time, not as debt, as a choice. Naira looked at the open window, then back at the vampire king standing in her doorway, offering protection he might not be able to guarantee. She dropped her bag.
Show me, she said.
Show me I'm not wrong to stay. Selim nodded once, something like relief crossing his features. Tomorrow, he will choose her in front of his entire court. Tonight, for the first time in years, Naira Vale slept without planning her escape.
We need to talk about what just happened.
Selim just told Naira that he's terrified of her, not because she's powerful, but because she makes him remember what mercy feels like. This vampire king who has ruled with absolute authority for 200 years is choosing a homeless human girl over his entire court's approval. If this moment gave you chills, hit that like button because you understand that this isn't just a rescue story anymore. This is about two people who are saving each other from the darkness they've been living in. The comment section is going crazy right now, and I want you to be part of this conversation. Tell me, do you think Selim can protect Naira from his own court? Drop your predictions below. And if you're binge-watching this story at 2 a.m., drop a crescent so I know I'm not alone in staying up for stories that matter. We're heading into Chapter 7 now, where Inspector Crow makes his deadliest move yet. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Stay with me. The police came at dawn. Naira woke to voices in the hallway, official, human, insistent.
Marcellus arguing.
Ilara's controlled fury. And beneath it all, a voice she recognized with bone-deep dread. Inspector Silas Crow. I have a warrant for Naira Vale, Crow said, loud enough to carry. Failure to appear for questioning regarding the Blackwater Bridge incident. You can produce her willingly, or I can come back with federal marshals. Selim appeared in her doorway, his expression carved from ice. Don't go with him. He has legal authority, Naira said, already standing. If I don't, he'll bring more. You can't fight human law without exposing everything. Naira. I'll be fine. She met his eyes, trying to believe her own lie. It's just a question. But the bond between them screamed otherwise. Crow's interrogation room was in a precinct building scheduled for demolition. Off the books, no cameras, no witnesses. He'd chosen it carefully. Sit. Crow pointed to a chair bolted to the floor in the center of the empty room. Naira sat. Her wrists were zip-tied in front of her, unnecessarily tight, cutting circulation. Crow circled her slowly, a predator savoring the hunt. 3 years I've been cleaning you off my streets, Naira. 3 years of you being nothing but trash beneath a bridge. He stopped in front of her. And now I find out you're worth something after all. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? Crow pulled out his phone, showing her the grainy footage of the rescue. You saved someone very important. Someone with friends in very high places. Or should I say, very low places. Naira's blood went cold. I've made some interesting contacts, Crow continued conversationally. People who are very interested in finding the girl from the river. People who aren't quite human. He leaned closer, his breath sour. Did you know vampires are real, Naira? Because I didn't. Not until 3 days ago, when one offered me $500,000 for your exact location. You're insane. Am I? Crow grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit here while I make a phone call. Then some very dangerous people are going to come to collect you. And I'm going to be rich enough to retire somewhere warm.
He pulled out his phone again, dialing.
That's when Naira felt it, a surge through the bond so powerful it stole her breath.
Pain. Rage.
And beneath it all, absolute certainty of her location. Selim was coming. Inspector Crow. The voice came from the doorway, smooth as silk over steel. Crow spun, hand going to his weapon. Selim stood in the entrance, flanked by Marcellus and two other vampires Naira didn't recognize. Behind them, incongruously, were three people in federal uniforms. "How did you," Crows started, "find her?" Selim's smile was a predator's expression. "The bond between us is absolute. She could be buried underground, and I would still know exactly where she breathes." He stepped into the room, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. "But I didn't come alone." One of the federal agents moved forward. "Inspector Silas Crow, you're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, assault." "This is bullshit." Crow's voice rose. "I have a warrant." "A warrant you forged." Marcellus held up a tablet. "We've been documenting your activities for the past 3 years. The homeless people you've brutalized. The evidence you've planted. The protection money you've collected from businesses in exchange for ignoring code violations." He turned the screen toward Crow. "Everything. And the attempted sale of a protected witness to known criminals," the federal agent added. "Your phone call? We recorded it. The people you contacted? Already in custody." Crow's face went from red to white. His eyes darted to Naira, then to Selim, understanding dawning too late. "You set me up." "No," Selim said softly. "You destroyed yourself. We simply ensured everyone would see it." He moved to Naira, producing a knife that made the federal agents tense. But he only cut through her zip ties, freeing her wrists with infinite gentleness. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Naira whispered, though she was shaking. "He touched you." It wasn't a question. Selim's eyes tracked the bruises forming on her chin, her wrists. Something ancient and murderous stirred behind his controlled expression. "Don't." Naira caught his arm. "He's not worth it." Selim looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He turned back to Crow. "You will stand trial. Human trial. You'll face human justice for your human crimes. And when you're convicted, and you will be, you'll spend the rest of your natural life in a cage, powerless, forgotten, exactly as you made others feel." "You can't do this," Crow snarled as the agents moved to cuff him. "I know what you are. I'll tell everyone. Tell them." Selim's voice was ice. "See who believes a corrupt cop facing 40 counts of criminal activity. See who listens when you ran about vampires and blood bonds and monsters in the dark." He leaned closer. "You wanted to sell Naira to my enemies. Instead, you've given me everything I need to ensure you never hurt another powerless person again." They dragged Crow away, still screaming threats that would never materialize. The room fell silent. "You came," Naira said quietly. "I will always come." Selim cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the bruise on her chin. "The bond showed me your fear. Your pain. I would have torn through walls to reach you. You didn't kill him, because you asked me not to." His eyes searched hers. "You're changing me, Naira Vale, making me choose mercy when every instinct screams for vengeance." Naira looked at this vampire king who had tracked her through magic, brought federal agents to ensure human justice, and held himself back from violence because she'd asked. "Good," she said. "Maybe we're changing each other." The bond between them settled, no longer screaming alarm but humming with something deeper.
Certainty. Trust.
Connection. And as Selim led her out of the abandoned building into the morning light, Naira realized she was no longer running. She was choosing to stay. The Hall of Crowns existed in a space that defied human architecture. Carved from obsidian that absorbed light rather than reflected it, the chambers stretched upward into darkness that had no ceiling, supported by pillars that looked grown rather than built. Each pillar bore the name of a vampire bloodline, etched in languages that predated written history. Naira stood at the center, dressed in black silk that Alara had provided, formal attire for a court that had never expected to see a human within its walls. Around her, in concentric circles rising like an amphitheater, sat the assembled, vampire lords and ladies from every territory, ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond imagining. 200 immortals, and every single one of them was staring at her. "Breathe," Selim murmured beside her. He stood in full regalia, black robes trimmed in silver, the circlet of thorns on his brow, every inch the king who had ruled for 2 centuries. But his hand rested lightly at the small of her back, an anchor in the storm. "I'm trying," Naira whispered back. A gong sounded, deep and resonant, vibrating through bone. Alara stepped forward, her voice carrying through the vast chamber without effort. "The assembly is convened. We gather to address a violation of the blood-bound covenant. Let the charges be read." Lord Darius rose from his seat in the first circle, his dark robes flowing like oil. "Lord Selim Draven, King of the Eastern Realm, you stand accused of allowing your life to be claimed by mortal hands in direct violation of the covenant established in the Year of Shadows. The human woman, Naira Vale, did willfully and knowingly save you from death, creating a bond forbidden by our oldest laws." Murmurs rippled through the assembled. "How do you answer?" Alara asked formally. "The facts are not in dispute," Selim said, his voice steady. "Naira Vale saved my life. The bond was formed. The covenant was broken. Then you acknowledge your guilt." Seraphine stood, her beauty sharp as broken glass. "The law is clear. Both parties must face the consequences. The human must be executed, and you, my lord, must abdicate your crown to cleanse the violation." "I acknowledge the violation," Selim replied, "but I do not acknowledge the sentence." The murmurs grew louder, angry now. "The law is not negotiable," Darius said coldly. "No," Selim agreed, "but it is layered. The blood-bound covenant is ancient, but it is not our oldest law." He turned, addressing the entire assembled. "Before the covenant, before the age of separation, there existed another law, one that predates every vampire in this chamber." Alara's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." "I invoke the life-bound accord," Selim declared, his voice ringing through the Hall of Crowns. "The law that states, when one life saves another at cost to themselves, the saved becomes bound to honor that sacrifice with protection eternal. I claim this human woman, Naira Vale, is under the Accord's protection." Silence fell like a blade. "The life-bound accord hasn't been invoked in 5 centuries, Seraphine said, her voice shaking with fury. "It applies only between vampires of equal standing." "It applies," Selim interrupted, "to any being capable of true sacrifice." Naira dove into freezing water. She shredded her hands on broken glass. "She dragged me to shore with lungs that were failing, knowing she might die in the attempt." He looked at Naira, and something profound passed between them through the bond. She sacrificed everything for a stranger. The accord was written for exactly this nobility of spirit. "She's human," Darius spat. "Yes," Selim said simply, "which makes what she did even more extraordinary. She had every reason to let me die. I am a predator, an immortal, a king whose kind has hunted her since the beginning. And yet she chose mercy." He turned back to the assembled. "If we punish that, we declare ourselves monsters in truth. This sets a precedent that will destroy us," Seraphine argued. "If humans can claim blood bonds with vampires, then we will adapt," Selim said firmly. "Or we will prove ourselves too rigid to deserve survival." He held out his hand to Naira. "Come forward." Naira's legs felt like water, but she stepped to his side. Selim removed his circlet, the symbol of his authority, worn by Eastern kings for 1,000 years. "By the power vested in me as Lord of the Eastern Realm, by blood and law and ancient right, I bind Naira Vale to this crown. She is declared protected sovereign, untouchable by violence, undeniable in authority, equal in standing to any lord of this court." He placed the circlet on her head. The Hall of Crowns erupted. Darius stood, his face contorted with rage. "This is treason against everything we are." He swept from the chamber, a dozen vampires following him. Seraphine remained seated, but her expression promised future war. This will fracture the realm.
Perhaps, Selim said.
Or perhaps it will save us from becoming relics of cruelty. He addressed those who remained, still more than half the assembled. I do not demand your approval. I demand your compliance. Naira Vale is under my protection. Any who touch her answer to me. Any who harm her declare war on my crown. One by one, ancient vampires began to kneel.
Not all of them.
Not even most, but enough. Marcellus first, his hand over his heart. Alara second, her expression unreadable. Then others, some with reluctance, some with curiosity, all with the understanding that the realm had fundamentally changed. Naira stood beside Selim, the circlet heavy on her head, feeling the weight of centuries of law bending around her. What happens now? She whispered. Now, Selim said quietly, we see if mercy is stronger than tradition. The bond between them blazed like a star, no longer a violation, but a bridge between worlds. The Court of Blood had made its choice, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book Naira never thought she'd get to read. The penthouse became home, not a hiding place, not temporary shelter, but home in a way she hadn't felt since her mother died. Her room overlooked the city, and sometimes she stood at the window watching the lights blur through rain and remembered what it felt like to be invisible beneath those same lights. She wasn't invisible anymore. The Eastern realm had fractured, as Seraphine predicted. Darius and his faction had withdrawn to the northern territories, declaring Selim's rule illegitimate. Other courts watched with wary interest, waiting to see if mercy would prove strength or weakness. But something unexpected happened. The vampires who remained, the ones who knelt in the Hall of Crowns, began to change. Slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. Selim changed the fastest of all. The old laws assumed humans were prey, he explained one evening as they reviewed petitions together, a task that had somehow become routine. We built our society on the premise that mortals were lesser, expendable. He looked at her, silver eyes reflecting lamplight. You proved that premise false. I just did what anyone should have done, Naira said. Exactly. Selim's slight smile held centuries of irony, which means we've been wrong for a very long time. The reforms began small. A tribunal to hear human complaints against vampire misconduct. Protections for the homeless population that had been prey for centuries. Medical clinics in areas where desperate humans often disappeared. Safe houses. Resources. Visibility for people the city had trained itself not to see. Naira oversaw much of it, her position as protected sovereign giving her authority she was still learning to wield. Marcellus called her the bridge, the connection between human and vampire worlds, between powerlessness and power. You're good at this, Alara observed one afternoon, reviewing Naira's proposal for expanding shelter services. Better than many vampires who've had centuries to learn governance. I know what it's like to be invisible, Naira said quietly. I know what it costs. The bond between her and Selim had settled into something profound. Not painful anymore, but present, a constant awareness of each other that felt less like invasion and more like coming home. She knew when he was troubled. He knew when she had nightmares. Neither could hide from the other completely. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first honest relationship she'd ever had. You realize what we're building will outlast both of us, Selim said one night. They sat in a study, surrounded by maps marking territories where reforms were taking hold. Even if I'm killed tomorrow, even if the realm fractures completely, what you've started will continue. We've started, Naira corrected.
No.
Selim looked at her with absolute certainty. This was always you. I'm just the crown that made others listen. But he was more than that. She'd watched him rule with a balance he claimed he'd forgotten, firm but fair, powerful but restrained. He'd executed no one in 3 months, an unprecedented mercy that scandalized older vampires and impressed younger ones. He negotiated where he once commanded. He listened where he once decreed. "You're changing the realm," Naira told him. "You changed me first," he replied. On the first warm evening of spring, Naira asked to go back. To Blackwater Span? Selim studied her carefully. "Why?" "Because I need to see it," Naira said. "I need to stand there and know I survived." They went at dusk, when the sky turned purple and the city lights began their nightly bloom. Marcellus wanted to send guards, but Selim dismissed them with a look. "Some things," he said, "require only 2 witnesses." Blackwater Span looked smaller than Naira remembered. The bridge stretched across the river in elegant gray stone, traffic humming overhead, ordinary and unremarkable. Beneath it, the space where she'd lived for 3 years waited in shadow. Naira descended the concrete stairs slowly, Selim following in silence. Her old corner was empty. Someone, probably city workers implementing the new anti-displacement ordinances, had cleaned it out. The cardboard was gone. The makeshift shelter was gone. Even the stains on the concrete had been scrubbed away. It was as if she'd never existed there at all. "I slept here," Naira said, touching the cold stone. "Right here for 1,087 nights. I counted them." She walked to where the river lapped against the bank. Inspector Crow stood there. "He kicked my shelter into the mud." "He's in prison," Selim said quietly. 40-year sentence. He'll die there." "I know." Naira stared at the water. It looked black and calm, nothing like the violence of that November storm. "I almost died here. Multiple times. From the cold. From illness. From Crow." She turned to face Selim. "Why didn't I?" "Because you're a survivor."
No.
Naira shook her head. "I survived because I was stubborn. Because giving up felt like letting them win. But I wasn't living.
I was just not dying."
There's a difference." She walked to the water's edge, to the exact spot where she'd stood before diving in. "I thought saving you wouldn't change anything. I thought I'd still be invisible, still be nothing. I thought it was just one good thing before I faded completely. Instead,"
Selim asked.
"Instead, you saw me." Naira's voice caught. "You and Ilera and Marcellus and even the ones who wanted me dead, you all saw me. For the first time in 3 years, I was with someone." She looked back at the bridge, at the space beneath where she'd been invisible. That man from the river, the king with the silver hair and the crown of thorns, he looked at me like I mattered. And then he made the whole world look too. Selim moved to stand beside her. "You saved more than my life that night. You saved something I thought I'd lost 2 centuries ago." He stared at the river that had nearly claimed them both.
"Hope."
The belief that mercy matters more than law. That what we choose defines us more than what we are. He turned to her. "I was drowning long before the car went into the river. You pulled me from that water too." The bond hummed between them, not binding anymore, but connecting. 2 people who'd saved each other in ways that transcended blood magic and ancient laws. "What happens now?" Naira asked. "Now." Selim smiled slightly. "Now we continue. Building something better. Fighting those who resist. Making mistakes and fixing them. Together." "Together," Naira echoed. They stood there as the last light faded from the sky, 2 figures at the river's edge where fate had knotted their lives together. Above them, the city moved on, indifferent to the miracle that had happened beneath its bridges. But Naira knew. She knew she'd been thrown away by the world and had clawed her way back to visibility. She knew she'd done the impossible, not just saving a vampire king, but proving that the powerless could still change everything. She knew that the girl who'd lived beneath Blackwater Span was gone, and someone stronger had taken her place. Not stronger because of power or position. Stronger because she'd survived. Because she'd chosen mercy when cruelty would have been easier. Because she'd refused to let the world's indifference make her indifferent in return. Ready to go home? Selim asked. Home. The word still felt strange. Wonderful. Real. Yes, Naira said. They climbed the stairs together, leaving Blackwater Span behind. Not forgotten, but finished. The river flowed on, indifferent, having failed to claim either of them. That night, in her room overlooking the city she'd once been invisible in, Naira Vale slept deeply and without nightmares. The bond hummed softly, a lullaby of connection and safety. The circlet Selim had placed on her head rested on the nightstand, catching moonlight like captured stars. And for the first time in 3 years, perhaps the first time in her entire life, Naira was unafraid of the dark. Because she knew that if she fell, someone would dive in after her. Because she knew that visibility, once earned, could not be stolen. Because she knew that beneath Blackwater Span, where the river had tried to take everything, she'd found the one thing worth saving. Herself. And in doing so, she'd saved a king, reformed a realm, and proved that even the most broken people can become someone's miracle. The city hummed beyond her window. The Eastern realm continued its transformation. And Naira Vale, once invisible, once discarded, once convinced she was nothing, slept peacefully in a home that would never ask her to be anything less than exactly who she was. A survivor. A bridge. A woman who'd looked death in the face and chosen life. For herself. And for a silver-haired king who'd learned that mercy was stronger than law, and that sometimes the people who save us are the ones the world taught us not to see. And there it is, a family story. Naira Vale, the girl the world threw away, is now sleeping peacefully, unafraid of the dark, with a vampire king who learned that mercy is stronger than law. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the most powerless among us can change everything, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I pour my heart into bringing you stories like this every single day. Second, smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that they matter, that they're visible, that their compassion can literally change worlds. Third, tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it when Naira dove into the freezing river? When Selim invoked the life-bound accord? When they returned to Blackwater Span together? I read every single comment, and your words fuel these stories. Tomorrow, I have another tale waiting for you. One just as powerful, just as unforgettable. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that broken people can become miracles. Until tomorrow, remember, you are seen, you matter, and your story isn't over yet. This is your story family, and I'll see you in the next one.